Welcome to Baptist for Liberty. I'm your host, Joanna Works, and
Andrew Sullivan.
Today we have a guest, which Andrew will introduce in just a moment. Our topic today is going to be on media and propaganda. As you know, our main theme for May and June has been on order, and I think this relates to a subject that we mentioned in an earlier podcast. Brother Andrew was talking about the conference he was at and order in the family, and one of the last messages was on parents' responsibility and stewardship over children, and one of the subjects, or points rather, in that was monitoring what your children watch and read, because the media and the things we take in, they form our minds and our worldview and our opinions on things, and this is very important. And so in ordering our thoughts, we should be mindful of using proper discernment and discretion in our viewing and picking out the good and the bad from the things that the world's going to throw at us. So that's our focus for today. And to discuss that with us is Brother Shults. And like I said, Brother Andrew is going to introduce him today.
Yes, so we have the pleasure of introducing Brother Jason Shults, who is the current pastor of Beverly Manor Baptist Church in Washington, Illinois, and also the dean of Illinois Baptist College. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm the dean of the college. I'm actually the associate pastor at the church.
Okay. Got my wires crossed then.
No problem.
Okay. Well, Brother Shults is also one of our contributing writers and part of our panel of preachers to answer the forum for us with our bi-monthly article and all that. And he is also on a YouTube channel called Five Guys in a Bible. I have personally listened to it, and so has Joanna. And they talk about different aspects of the Bible, and it all is around five churches that are independent Baptists, and highly recommended, which is Five Guys in the Bible once again. He is also won 81 personal awards from different press associates, shared in 38 other press awards and other works, with other co-workers, and he spent 2 years as an editor of the Manor News Dispatch, then 10 more as editor of Woodford County Journal and regional reporter for the Bloomington Pantograph?
Yeah, Andrew, you got through all of those crazy words just fine.
Oh, okay, good. So, we are talking about media and all of that. So I will stop talking and let Brother Shults talk.
Well, hi. We're going to be talking about media, and I think we're going to be talking a lot about propaganda. Isn't that right, Joanna?
Yeah.
Okay.
I really want to focus on discernment in, the media that we use and how we use it.
Okay.
And I think telling what propaganda is and how to recognize it, I think is very important.
Okay. Well, the term propaganda has been around for a long time. I think most of the time when we use it, we think about it like in its height during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
The Germans and the Russians were both very good at distributing written propaganda. Of course, it's not always written. Sometimes it's over the airwaves. The Japanese have got into the act with the English-speaking radio broadcasts like, Tokyo Rose and those things. But essentially, propaganda is disseminating information based on a particular point of view, regardless of other facts that might be opposed to your point of view.
Okay. So, propaganda in of itself, is it a negative thing? Because I think a lot of times we use it as a negative term.
Sure, it gets used almost exclusively as a negative term, which really isn't necessarily the case. I mean, sometimes propaganda can be positive. I guess it depends on your point of view, right? I mean, when the Germans were distributing propaganda, they thought it was positive. We thought it was negative. The U.S. had their own propaganda department, and we would have thought that was positive, and they would have thought it was negative. So, as far as is propaganda ever a good thing, we usually use that word propaganda when it's something that we don't like. When it's something that we agree with, we just call it news. Which is too bad, really, because it causes us to excuse the kind of bias that gets involved. I'll give you an example. Think back to your grade school history books.
Mm-hmm.
Grade school history book about the American Revolution. I am almost certain there will have been an illustration of the Boston Massacre in there. Can you picture it in your head? The Boston Massacre, in the picture there would have been a line of British redcoats on one side firing into the crowd on the left-hand side. 5 colonists were killed. That picture that gets used so often was prepared by Paul Revere, and it was really designed to, fan the flames of British hatred.
Mm-hmm.
Future President John Adams actually defended those British troops in court and won, showing the crowd had gathered late at night, started pelting a lone sentry with rocks and sticks and ice balls, and the fight erupted when the other soldiers came in to protect them. But that picture is essentially propaganda. Okay, it was propaganda supporting an American Revolution. It conveniently rearranged the facts to produce outrage. You have this column of British troops like they're advancing on in an organized manner. You even got Crispus Attucks, who was the first black man shot as part of the revolution. He's white in Paul Revere's print because he thought it would be more impactful. So, we've got propaganda that comes from every side of an issue. And depending on which side of an issue you're on, you're probably not going to use that word propaganda. You're probably just going to call it news.
Right, and there's something that you brought up about it was used to fan the flames, and that's the emotional, get people their emotions high. And when your emotions are high, though, you're not really thinking the issues through very clearly.
Sure. And that, sometimes I don't want to suggest just because it can be emotional that it's always bad. I mean, there was this fascinating series of films made by the U.S. Office of War. I think it was called the U.S. Office of War Information, a series of films called Why We Fight, World War II. And it's propaganda, and it's good. But, the nature of propaganda is all of it has a bias. For example, there's a couple of films in there on Russia that are particularly interesting because Russia, since they were our allies in World War II, these films paint the Soviet Union history as this brave and heroic people standing for centuries against German aggression. And then, just a few years later, U.S. propaganda films had a much different view on Russia after World War II.
Right. I can't remember I think it was General Patton that got in trouble for getting mad that we were allying ourselves with Russia. And he said, it's not going to be that long that they're going to be our enemies again. Yeah,
and they were. And then, of course, any U.S. propaganda on Russia would not have painted a brave and heroic history of the country. But at that particular moment in World War II, that's exactly what we did.
Right. And it was very convenient for us because them being on the Eastern Front.
Right. I mean, we wanted their support, and in particular, those films, I think, was showing, it was showing Russia as being great because Germany was able to walk in and crush them initially, for the most part. It was kind of to scare the U.S. and say, here, look how great Russia is and what Germany did to them. So here's why we have to fight now before they get on our soil.
Okay. Do you have any more statements or anything on this topic you want to say before we get into some questions and answers?
No, I don't think so. We can jump into some questions.
And you mentioned textbooks, so because you teach, in any of the textbooks or materials that you use, do you see any propaganda in those?
Yeah. I mean, we here at the college, we've got textbooks for each class and also commentaries. Pretty good-sized library for students to utilize to write papers and things. And I'll say we're pretty clear about what the nature of a textbook is. I mean, I can say any class I teach will start with a syllabus that says the Bible is our textbook and it's authoritative, and then there's another book or two that you have to read, but you don't have to agree with everything in the textbook, nor should you. For that matter, just as a side note, I also stress you don't have to agree with the instructor. As long as we agree with the Bible, we're going to be okay. That's the only authoritative thing in our classrooms. After that, we're all entitled to our own opinions. We just don't get to have our own facts. So,
right.
Of course, I run into things which, in what I would say, I have a pretty wide definition of propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
I run across things that would qualify. Some of it I agree with, some of it I don't agree with. But you run into that in religious writings all the time. For example, someone will define the word church as assembly, which is what it means, and then proceed to try to defend a universal church position by saying the word doesn't always mean what it means. And, that it just, to me, that falls under propaganda. Right? We have a position that we want you to believe, and so we're going to argue our position outside of the actual facts. Right? So there's a danger when we try to use our common sense or our preconceived notions to explain Scripture. And I guess here's where I'm going to get in big trouble. I think we, Sovereign Grace Landmark Baptists get into the habit, too, with traditionalism. I mean, there's a lot we try to defend with common sense or opinion that's hard to defend biblically, right? But you run into that with religious writings all the time. You have to sort through what's useful commentary on the Scripture and what is the writer's own opinion.
Right. One of the things when I was younger, I remember in elementary school, one of the first basics about writing was you're supposed to learn the difference between opinion and fact. And sometimes, even as adults, it seems like those lines and distinctions get blurred or conveniently forgotten.
Sure, we have our opinions about what the facts should be, and we're pretty staunch in our opinions sometimes. So we'll pick and choose our facts and support what we already believe.
Right. Okay, so one of the other questions I had was, what do you look for in a news source?
What do I look for in a news source? Honestly, Joanna, Andrew, I don't know that there's a lot of honest brokers of news out there anymore. I mean, you've got major media markets like MSNBC and CNN and Fox who have essentially sold out to a political perspective. I mean, your local hometown newspaper is probably the best source of news that's actually going to impact you. I can tell you maybe what I always strived for when I was in the newspaper business and I was writing on some controversial issue. After my first couple of years in the business, I learned I didn't want everybody happy with me. If the issue was really controversial, I wanted everybody mad at me. And that usually meant I covered it about as fairly as possible. But it's hard to pull that off in the mass media world of you have this advertiser-driven news. You can't imagine a major news network covering news in a way that's so fair-handed that both sides are angry with them and they'll not have any more advertisers.
Right.
So
I've noticed, because I listen to more conservative radio hosts and such than watching liberal news, but there's this attitude between some of them of, well, it's my job to make liberals mad. But from what you're saying, it's not that you're trying to make opposing people mad, but rather if you're covering it in a fair way, everybody's going to be a little opposed to what you have to say.
right. I mean, and of course, I'm approaching it from a newspaper background, right? But if I'm writing on an issue that was controversial, and and I write it, and both sides are happy with me, I know I probably haven't dug into it very far. If only one side's happy with me, I know that I've messed up. So I actually found that times when I was doing my best work, it would have sort of everybody a little frustrated with me because I will have shown both sides' argument. And of course, everybody nowadays just wants their side of the argument out there, which a lot of our mass media is pretty good at.
Right.
One of the things also I'd try to avoid commentary as a news. And I think we get that mixed up today.
Mm-hmm.
There are just tons of websites that are essentially commentary on media reports, and that's really not a good news source. You'll always know you're on one of those because there'll be a couple of dozen links down the side that say things like, scientists reveal hidden secret to heart health, and you won't believe how she lost 800 pounds, or new rules for fill in your town's name leaves drivers furious, 20 most embarrassing beach photos, things like that, which I call click candy, or, essentially it's the website makes money by redirecting you to other crazy stuff, which should tell you two things. First off, that if you're reading their story, they assume you're the kind of person who's going to read those things too. And secondly, you're not the customer, you're the product. You are what they're selling and making money by getting you to click on other stuff.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with the term clickbait, but the idea that as subscribers or the people clicking were the product, that's an interesting idea or perspective.
I never thought of it like that before.
Yeah, that's the nature of advertising. And it goes back to, the TV days, right? I mean, even back in the 50s and 60s when you had, good old American sitcoms on, the Donna Reed show. They weren't making money by you watching the Donna Reed show. They were making money by advertisers paying because you watched the Donna Reed show and they could prove it. So they were buying and selling you.
Yeah, that's true. And even the radio days, they did that.
Right.
So, since major media, they all have their biases, is it necessary or just a good idea, perhaps, to have multiple sources for news to get a broader scope?
That's probably the best way. Don't let one source tell you what to think. To use a Bible phrase, no facts are of private interpretation. You simply can't rely on one source to give you all the pertinent information because they will either intentionally or unintentionally leave some things out. And can I just add, it's not always intentional. I'm there with everybody else when we complain about media bias, but we seldom give people the benefit of the doubt nowadays. If there's a mistake, we assume there's some kind of evil motive behind it.
Mm-hmm.
But you can be biased without intending to be.
Right.
However, when you read something or you watch something on the news, you're never getting all the facts that a reporter collects. You wouldn't want all the facts a reporter collects. You know, a reporter's experience and their worldview is what helps them sort through those facts to find what's important. And two people dealing as honestly as they can with the same set of facts are going to come out with different accountings of what's important. So, you know, our predispositions and our nature affect things without us even necessarily meaning to. We can't discount our sinful nature. Don't forget, even the guys that you like have a sinful nature, and they're not going to be perfect.
Oh, absolutely.
So once you've collected all that information, you've got to account for your own sinful nature as well. You know, collect as much information as possible and distill it through the filter of a biblical worldview and see where it takes you. But we tend to be too lazy nowadays. We like people telling us what we should think instead of actually thinking for ourselves.
Yeah, and that's one of the big dangers about relying, I think, putting too much faith in like one source or one person. You know, they're going to fail, and we need to be leaning on the Holy Spirit's leadership and guiding us and not just abdicating that to somebody else to guide us.
Right. I agree.
And, of course, that goes on spiritual matters as well as, you know, anything in this world. We're constantly taking in information and having to make decisions.
It's not as if the Holy Spirit lacks expertise in leading us on practical things on a day-to-day basis. You know, of course the Spirit can do that if we seek wisdom from God.
Right. And was it, I can't think of the exact verse, but I'm paraphrasing here. The reason of exercise, you know, that the use, the discernment of going from the milk to the meat, you work up to that by using and exercising what God's already revealed to you.
Right.
All right, so the next kind of, well, one of the other questions we had was, you kind of touched on this already, with whether people have intents, you know, malicious intents with what they omit in their reporting. And that was, you know, the sins of omission versus commission, which is omission's a failure to do something, whereas commission would be an actively do something wrong. So, like, in the media would be, you know, leaving information out versus deliberately presenting a falsehood.
Right. And I think you've got examples of both of those things. I mean, the leaving out of information, that's always going to happen. You know, a reporter probably includes maybe a fourth of the facts he collects in a story, because you wouldn't read the whole story if you put in all the facts that he collected. You know, the New York Times motto, it's kind of funny, the New York Times motto is all the news that's fit to print. The reality is most media outlets are interested in all the news that fits, you know, because there's a space crunch in newspapers or a time crunch on TV and radio. And that's where the internet has an advantage for sure, because they can go on and on and on, and, you know, they know there's going to be somebody out there interested who will read the whole thing. But, you know, leaving things out is something that's going to happen, and that's the nature of the business, including falsehoods. That should never happen, but, you know, we've had some examples of that in recent history. I mean, didn't I tell you about that time that me and Brian Williams and Hillary Clinton were on a helicopter taking live fire from a sniper?
Right.
It's a joke, obviously. We weren't on a helicopter.
No, you were on a boat, right?
I'm just kidding. But we have a nature to embellish, right? And we see it with people, you know, like Hillary Clinton or Brian Williams, which that was a personal embellishment that he's a media person. But it happens within It happens within news stories and reporting, too. Sometimes we have a tendency to embellish, and that's something that you always have to rein back when you're in the business, but not everybody does it very successfully.
Right. Andrew, did you have any questions yet or thoughts?
Well, I was wondering if embellished stories get more attention.
Definitely when it's caught, yes. I mean, when newspaper reporters are caught embellishing, they're caught lying, that gets a lot of attention. As far as, is it going to get more attention, like is the news story going to get spread further? I don't really think it's going to help that much, because any reporter, and this stands for, in writing or TV, radio, whatever, any reporter who has a lick of common sense is going to understand if they're going to embellish with something that's embellished to the degree to get a lot of attention, the more attention you get for your embellishment, the more likely you are to get caught. Right? So when people embellish a story, it's either a news source that doesn't care. Nobody cares. If I told you the National Enquirer embellished a story, it's not like you're going to have a heart attack and die from that shock. Right? But, reputable news sources aren't going to embellish much intentionally, because when you do that, it's going to get caught nowadays, because media is under a microscope, just like everybody else is.
Right. When you say reputable news source, what's your definition for that?
Oh, I walked into that one.
You opened the door.
I don't know that I have a good definition for it, because there's some that are obviously disreputable. Tabloids like the National Enquirer. You don't read that. They're not going to care if you hear the truth or not. I wouldn't even call this. I'm going to get myself in trouble. You've got CNN and MSNBC on one side. You've got Fox News on the other extreme. I don't consider either one of them reputable, because they're selling their side of each political perspective, right? I mean, when a news source is catering to a specific point of view, which I think we can agree that there are news sources that cater to a liberal viewpoint, and clearly there's news sources that cater to a conservative viewpoint. If they're doing that, then they've stopped being news, in my opinion. They've stopped being reputable. Now, there's a whole lot of things in the middle between those, but even in those things in the middle, I'd consider reputable news sources. There's going to be errors and there's going to be bias, because we're human. I don't necessarily buy into the, assigning evil motives to people when they make mistakes. I think a lot of the media bias is unintentional media bias, but that doesn't change the fact that it's there. So, as far as like giving a news network or a newspaper or magazine that I'm going to endorse, there's not a chance I'm going to do that.
Right. Okay.
Because as soon as I do, next week they're going to do something really stupid.
Right. Like the day this podcast gets posted, people listen to it, and then bam.
Right.
Well, I think all three of us write a little bit. So, Andrew started a blog, and we're constantly sharing that. And, it's personal experience and what the Lord's taught him, but we can always learn more tricks in writing or whatever. So do you have any advice for us young writers?
Well, it's going to depend on the kind of writing that you're doing. I guess the two pieces of advice I gave most writers is read a lot. You know, you're always going to write to some extent in the style that you read. You know, I had to be careful when I first started with the newspaper. You know, I had a tendency to write in like King James English style, which is not going to go over in a newspaper, right? But you write according to what you read. You read a lot of Dr. Seuss, you're going to write a lot of short sentences. You know, so read good stuff, and that's going to help you write. The other advice I'd give you is write the way you talk. So there's this old saying that writing is just sitting down over a piece of white paper and straining until blood comes out of your forehead and forms words on the paper. You know, it should not be that hard. You can talk, so write the way you talk. You know, assume whatever it is you want to communicate, you've got somebody sitting in a chair across from you. How would you tell them? Sit down and write it the way you would say it, and then you can go through and edit it and make some practical changes. But write the way you talk. It's going to be most natural and sound best.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So we touched a little bit on new media. Do you have any nitpicks against social media, news media, or anything you see that it's doing good?
You know, there's positives and negatives to both. The positive is we live in a world where you don't always have to rely on a newspaper or a television reporter to tell you what has happened, because we live in a world where everybody has a cell phone in their pocket, and as soon as they see somebody start to get arrested, they're pulling that thing out and hitting the record, right? And so, you know, with this recent interest in police shootings and police brutality, you don't have to just rely on what reporter's going to tell you. You can go on YouTube and watch the video, see it for yourself, make your own judgments on whether something was excessive or not. So that's good, but the bad part of that is it's readily available. You know, passing on this information is readily available to everybody, which would be good if everybody was impartial. But we live in a world where people have been taught what to think and not how to think. And so as much as we've got media that is catering to a liberal viewpoint or to a conservative viewpoint, the reason media does that is because we've got a country that's split into liberal and conservative viewpoints. And so even your everyday person who's got access to be able to distribute information generally is doing it from a slanted perspective.
All right, I think we're running out of time for the Q&A. If we're going to play our little, I don't know if it's really a game, but every other podcast or so we usually play something. So this is kind of my remix of a game I started to play from an audio drama called Rights, Wrongs, and Reasons, but we were going to look at it from perspective of writing and if it's truthful, propaganda, entertainment, or informative. So, we each picked 2 articles that we were going to take turns reading and then commenting on. And who wanted to go first? Andrew? Or
I can go first. That's fine. All right.
all right, because you've been quiet. Because I was going to let the guests have the pick, but you've been too quiet, so.
Well, you had so many questions, I didn't want to interrupt that.
Yeah.
Train of thought.
Sorry. All right, so go ahead and read your first one.
Are we doing 1 or 2?
You do one, and then I'll do one, and then Brother Shults will read one. and then we'll go back around if we have time with our second one.
Okay. For some reason, I have this saved on my computer, and it keeps going back to the main news site.
Oh.
Hold on. Here we go. Should I say the name of it, or should I start reading, or what would you like me to do?
Just read the headline and then read the article.
Okay, so this one, the first one I'm going to talk about actually deals with abortion, and it says, the name of the article is Fantastic. Abortions are declining all across the country. And it reads, if I can get it, it says, abortion is one of the most critical issues of our time because it is, at its core, it's all about the trampling of the rights of an unborn child. And yes, a child still in the womb is entitled to those unalienable rights mentioned in the Declaration of Independence, the right of life being chief among them. With so much pro-abortion nuttiness being shoved down our throats as a culture, it's truly a miracle of God to see the number of babies being aborted drop. There's hope for our future after all. According to the Associated Press, since 2010, abortions have declined nearly everywhere, not only in states that have tightened restrictions, but also in most states that have not, both red and blue. AP highlights a few of the potential explanations. Abortion rights advocates have attributed to expanded access to effective contraceptives and a drop in unintended pregnancies. Some foes of abortion say that there has been a shift in societal attitudes, with more women choosing to carry their pregnancies to term. Several of the states that have been most aggressive in passing anti-abortion laws, including Indiana, Missouri, Ohio, and Oklahoma, have seen their abortion numbers drop by more than 15% since 2010. But more liberal states such as New York, Washington, and Oregon have also declined of that magnitude, even as they maintain unrestricted access to abortion. Nationwide, the AP survey showed a decrease in abortion of 12% since 2010. This is super good news. As long as conservatives continue to fight against horrible atrocity, those numbers will continue to dwindle no matter how hard this utterly insane culture fights against it. You know why? Because God is for those who are attempting to preserve life, and nothing those who oppose his will can do will stop him. Human life is precious because it's made in the image of God. This is why it's more critical than ever, especially with abortion dying down, to step up to the plate and fight harder than ever before to this endless struggle.
Okay. Before we start discussing the article, I found where I wrote the rules for the game. The point is to discuss whether it's informative, persuasive, or entertainment, and why. So, Brother Shults, what did you think of the article?
Well, it's informative to some extent because it is giving you some facts. Okay. Although I would note that the facts that it's giving you are quoted from an Associated Press article, which essentially is reporting on reporting, which, you know, every time you get another layer of reporting in there, you've got it subject to more human error. You know, it's probably not going to be a popular thing for me to say. I'm going to put it in the category of entertainment. Somebody who comes to a website called Young Conservatives to get their news, and it's news that's reported. You know, it's commentary on news. Remember, I was saying there's lots of websites that have that. We're going to tell you something that came in the news, and then we're going to tell you what to think about it. Mm-hmm. If you're going to those places to get your information, you've probably already formed an opinion, so you don't need to be persuaded, right? I don't think I can put it in the category of informative because maybe the original article was informative, but they didn't write the original information, so I'm stuck sticking it in entertainment.
Oh, I see. I would put it in the persuasive category because of the tone of the writer and what he said himself. And I think the main focus is an optimism about abortions being declined, or is being on the decline, and how positive conservative movement has been. So I thought it was more of supposed to be a persuasive argument on we're doing a good job, keep it up.
Want my opinion?
Yeah.
Reading it, I knew this was going to be an article narrowed to conservatives, which is why I chose it. But I thought it was partly informative, but at the same time, it also gives their own spin on it, leaning more toward the conservative side. If it were more liberal news side, it might do the opposite effect.
Right. And some of the information that they left out, though, was actually a third reason for abortions being on decline is not contraceptives, but actually abortion pills. You can buy those over the counter. It doesn't prevent you from getting pregnant, but it does dismiss the pregnancies, and there's no tracking of those numbers.
Right.
And there's some of the Facebook pages and stuff that we share on Baptist for Liberty's Facebook page are pro-life movements that do try to have a positive effect on helping women choose life for their babies, such as Save the Storks, which they bring vans with ultrasounds and just not a high pressure, but just try to comfort women and show them, this is a living baby inside of you, and there is support and a network if you're willing to reach out for it. So I think there are some positive things, but I do feel like this article was definitely either more of a persuasive or entertainment than informative.
And
I'd agree with that.
Can I just throw out there that because I put it in the entertainment category, it doesn't mean that I disagree with the article. I mean, I am staunchly pro-life. I probably agree right down the line with everything this person's saying. But if we're evaluating the reporting, I don't see where he did any reporting, and it's catering to people who are already sharing his opinion, essentially. I mean, I would come to read that because I would agree with it.
Right. And I think even when we agree with people, though, sometimes we still need to use some discernment in how we categorize what they're saying.
Right.
Okay, should I go next?
Sure.
Okay, I'll read this one. Waco police deny public access to information on deadly biker brawl. Following the biker brawl that left 9 dead, 18 injured, and over 170 arrested for participating in organized crime in Waco, Texas, police have yet to release information regarding the exact details of the event, and some of the information they have released has been flawed and refuted by both witnesses and video surveillance. After a fight that broke out between rival biker gangs at a Twin Peaks restaurant in Waco, Texas on May 17th, Waco police have yet to release information regarding the exact details that left, kind of repeats itself, sorry. Yahoo News requested information on the shooting as is allowed by the Texas Public Records Act, but noted that the documents it received appeared to be haphazardly redacted. The documents obtained by Yahoo News omitted the names of arresting officers while leaving the identities, addresses, and other contact information of suspects next of kin, and they did not give any information regarding where each victim was killed and by whom. Waco Police Sergeant W. Patrick Swanton said that the department suspected there would be issues at the Twin Peaks location prior to the shooting, and as a result, they were prepared with officers on the scene. While the details have not been released regarding how many of the 9 deceased and 18 injured were wounded by the officers on the scene, Swanton claimed that there were multiple people on the scene firing weapons at each other before the bikers began shooting at police and the officers returned fire, wounding and possibly killing several. After Yahoo News submitted its original request for information on May 19th, the Waco City Attorney's Office sent a letter to the Texas Attorney General on Wednesday requesting permission to withhold the records from Yahoo News and other media outlets that have made similar requests, like Truth and Media on Facebook. In the letter, Assistant City Attorney Judith Benton cited a need to withhold the information pertaining to an open and pending case in order to deal with the detection, investigation, and/or prosecution of a crime is a compelling reason for non-disclosure. Although Waco did release 19 pages of documents to media outlets that requested information, Yahoo News noted that, other than a few dispatch call logs about the first shots fired, none of the pages pertained to the homicide reports that had been requested. In addition to refusing to release crucial information from the shooting, some of the details the Waco Police Department has released have contained major errors. Following the incident, police claimed that as many as 1,000 weapons were recovered from the scene. However, they later admitted that 1,000 was an exaggerated estimate and that the actual number of weapons found was 318. Out of those weapons, only 118 handguns. The rest were knives, clubs, brass knuckles, and chains with padlocks attached to them. Police also claimed that they found one AK-47 accompanied by body armor in the parking lot. Although Swanton claimed that the 9 individuals killed were all part of criminal motorcycle gangs, the family of 65-year-old Jesus Delgado Rodriguez, one of the men killed, claimed that he was not involved in an outlaw motorcycle gang and did not lead a life of violence. The Associated Press reported that not only did Rodriguez not have a criminal record in Texas, he was an active-duty Marine from 1969 to 1973, and he received several awards, including the Purple Heart and a Navy Commendation Medal. As previously reported, 170 individuals were arrested, charged with engaging in organized criminal activity, and held on $1 million bonds following the shooting. The AP noted that according to records kept by the Texas Department of Public Safety, 4 of the 9 men killed and 117 of the 170 suspects have no previous criminal records in the state of Texas. USA Today reported that one of the individuals arrested, Matthew Clendenin of Hewitt, Texas, has filed a civil rights lawsuit against the city of Waco, the McLennan County Sheriff's Office, and the individual officers on the scene of the shooting. Clendenin is a member of the Scimitars Motorcycle Club, and while he was present at the Twin Peaks restaurant on May 17th, his lawsuit claims that he did not encourage or solicit any criminal activity at Twin Peaks that day. While police have yet to release the video footage from the surveillance cameras at Twin Peaks, they did push the narrative that all the bikers present were engaged in the brawl and fighting one another. In contrast, when the New York Daily News obtained footage from the security cameras, it noted that most of the leather-clad patrons ran away from the shooting or ducked under tables to dodge violence, while some of the bikers tried to direct other people to safety. The Associated Press also noted that while police claimed the fighting started in the bathroom of the Twin Peaks, escalated into the bar area, and was then carried out in the parking lot where the officers present became involved. Representatives from the franchise told the AP that the fighting began outside the restaurant, not inside, as police have previously said. Sorry, that one was much longer.
Well, that's all right. I would say that's informative. I mean, there's a lot of information in there. it's kind of odd that it's about a gang shooting, motorcycle gangs, shooting police, but it starts off more about the lack of cooperation that the police are giving to reporters who are trying to cover the shooting. It's a lot about the taking the Freedom of Information Act shenanigans that took place between the city's attorney and the reporter at the beginning of the story, and then it gets into actual facts of the incident toward the end. It's just kind of funny as a side note. I've been through those shenanigans, and I have some advice for the city of Waco. If you want to cause a reporter problems with Freedom of Information Act requests, don't do it by giving them too little information. Do it by giving them too much. I had a school district who answered a Freedom of Information request that I made with a letter saying they had over 3,000 pages to submit at 50 cents a page, and it would cost me about $1,500, and then, of course, I'd have to read the 3,000 or 4,000 pages. That strategy is way more effective than not giving out enough information.
Right.
But, yeah, I would say the article is informative.
Andrew, are you still with us?
Yeah. I would say it's informative as well. The article, previous one, you could definitely see some slander toward liberal media, and I'm not noticing any in this one.
Right. Actually, I kind of see it's more of a persuasive one, but maybe this is based on my own bias because of the news source. And I know that this particular website, they focus a lot on problems with the police. And they do try to reveal the truth, I guess, where they can. But this is one of those topics that is like their pet peeve or that they're constantly on is problems with the police. And so I can kind of see where it is persuasive because it's trying to show where the police may have been misleading on this incident in Waco. But it does have a lot of facts as well.
Okay, so with the articles like preceding this article, you've noticed more of a persuasive tone.
I believe so. I think that this particular website, it's truthandmedia.com, and I like reading them. It's one of my favorites that I go to a lot. But I do know that their bias is in fighting discrepancies in police department, police abuse. And so I could see where they're trying to persuade people sometimes that the police aren't always honest. That's one of their big messages. And, I don't think it's necessarily like they're trying to be dishonest about it, because the whole purpose of them is they're trying to cover other sides of issues and not just say it's necessarily racist or anything like that, but the police militarization is a problem.
Right.
And also, as I was reading it, I noticed that they quoted AP and other news sources a lot. And like Brother Shults pointed out, a lot of that shorter article that you read, Andrew, it quoted AP, and most of their facts came from that. Whereas this one, they quoted other news sources, but most of their facts seem to come directly from the reporter himself that wrote the article.
I can definitely see it being more persuasive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I guess we just have time for Brother Shults to read one of his.
Okay, well, I'm going to read this one. This is from the Business Insider, and the article's headline is "The World's Elderly Are on a Crime Spree." It says, in May, 9 men allegedly stole more than $300 million in cash and gems from the Hatton Garden in the heart of London's Jewelry Exchange. The heist is considered one of the most brazen in recent memory. The thieves had to disable the elevator, climb down the shaft, use heavy-duty power tools to drill into the vault before making off with the loot, undetected. This was clearly the work of some seasoned professionals. But when the cops finally rounded up the alleged culprits earlier this month, they found the crew even more seasoned than they could have imagined. The youngest was 43 years old. The oldest was 76, with two of them pushing 60. As unbelievable as it seems, the Hatton Garden heist is part of a growing disregard for the law among the oldest members of our society. Bloomberg Business recently reported a sharp uptick in crime rates among senior citizens around the world. In South Korea, for example, crimes committed by people 65 and over rose 12.2% from 2011 to 2013, which includes a shocking 40% increase in violent crimes such as murder, robbery, and rape, according to Korea Times. Geriatric crime in Japan has also risen, almost doubling since 2003, the Telegraph reported. The elderly now account for more shoplifting offenses than teenagers there. In the Netherlands, a 2010 study revealed a similar spike in arrest rates and incarceration among the elderly. And in London, arrests of elderly have risen 10% since 2009. The number of senior citizens in prison has also risen at a rate 3 times that of the overall prison population over the last decade, according to Bloomberg. The U.S., however, may be bucking the trend. The rate of elderly crime among seniors has decreased since the 1980s, according to Bloomberg, while the elderly prison population has grown by 550% over the last 25 years. It may be attributable to longer prison sentences for drug-related crimes, as the New York Times notes. So why are we experiencing this great crime wave, and what can we do to stop it? Factors such as inadequate retirement savings and the increased cost of medical care and food can attract a senior citizen to crime. Robert Mora, a financial planner specializing in retirement, wrote for Forbes. Emotions like loneliness, isolation, depression, stress, anxiety, inadequacy, and boredom might play a role as well. South Korea blames the spike in senior citizen crime on higher poverty rates among the elderly. The Netherlands concluded in its report that the spike in elderly crime can be attributed to psychiatric, psychological, financial, economic, judicial, and psychosocial factors. Goodness, whatever that means. All that news comes with a warning. As people continue to live longer, there will be a growing senior population susceptible to crime. Mora advocates that, along with smart financial planning, retirees need to have a social network to support them in their later years. Plans to stay physically and mentally fit and healthy ways to channel their boredom.
I think that's more entertainment.
As a side note, I skipped a couple of really boring paragraphs in there because I just edited it on the fly.
Okay. I noticed you had skipped a little bit, but yeah, it sounds a little more like it's on the entertainment bent. Especially, I mean, just the headlines itself. As soon as I read that when you sent that to me, it made me laugh. But it does, like, if it's really on the rise, would it be, like they pointed out, the prison population is aging?
Right, and it noted that.
And career criminals, you know, they're aging as well.
What do you think, Andrew?
Oop. Andrew, did we lose you?
No, my sound is just getting muffled for some reason.
I thought maybe he was outraged by this spree of elderly crime.
I started laughing a little bit because of the article.
Right.
It was very entertaining, and I think the tone of the writer was very playful too.
Yeah, I think it was definitely. At first, I was kind of thinking it was propaganda, trying to, or maybe a little persuasive, trying to tell us things about the elderly. But then, like, more towards the end, it became more like entertainment to me.
Right. And I do think, though, sometimes propaganda can come in the form of entertainment, though. And, like they suggest...
Entertaining.
Huh?
I said propaganda can definitely be entertaining.
Right. And some of the things that they suggested for curbing it is kind of socialist, support. Although, from a biblical standpoint, our families and things, we need to be taking care of our elderly and those in our community ourselves.
Good.
Not necessarily through tax dollars, though.
Okay. Here's why I picked this article, and I definitely, if I was only going to get to do one, this is the one I wanted to do.
Okay.
This is a news version of an infomercial. I picked it because it's actually all three of our categories in one. It's informative, entertaining, and persuasive.
Right.
There's lots of facts and stats to be informative, right? Giving you facts. It's entertaining because you're right. The writer's playful. I love lines like, there's seasoned professionals and there's a new gray crime wave. I mean, it's entertaining for the novelty of it. But what I think most people will miss, and this is where you have to read news with a critical eye, is at the end, I'm willing to bet that one of the sources that were quoted in the story actually pitched this story to the writer. Because did you catch that there was a financial planner quoted in there giving advice, and
right.
it ends with him advocating strong financial planning and a supportive social network. That is, that's where the infomercial part of it comes in.
Right.
That guy is hoping that someone reads it and goes, oh, he's right, I don't want that to happen to me, or more likely, I don't want that to happen to Grandpa, and we should get him in touch with this financial planner. Right? So it's all of them in one.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people don't know the mix behind what happens and how a news story comes about. A lot of times it's because someone will come to a reporter and say, hey, have you ever thought about writing about this? And, even if the reporter is approaching it from an unbiased perspective, the person who brought the story to him has a reason why, right? And I'd be willing to bet that was the financial planner's idea to have that story.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think about that. I mean, I did notice that the financial planner, was coming in there, and there wasn't, another alternative or something. Right. Just quick announcements. We're almost out of time here and have to close for the day. But Saturday the 20th, we will not have a podcast, but we should return on the 27th. Now, as we mentioned earlier at the start of our little game sort of thing, we each had 2 articles. So I'm going to put the links to the articles that we were able to read in the description, and I'm going to also put the links to the articles that we didn't get to read on this podcast. And so any audience listeners, go ahead and read those articles and send us your feedback on what you thought of those articles. If they were informative, entertaining, or persuasive, or a little bit of each, and why you think of that. And honestly, if you've learned anything at all in this podcast, go ahead, give us some feedback. You can reach us on our Facebook page. You can comment on YouTube videos, on SoundCloud, or send an email to the editor at worksjoanna@yahoo.com. Okay? We look forward to reading any feedback you have for us. Thank you.
James chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. It says, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of a good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. Those things which you have both learned and received and heard and seen in me do, and the God of peace shall be with you.